Hi everybody. I would just like to begin our session tonight by acknowledging the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung Bunurong peoples, traditional owners and custodians of the unceded lands on which we meet tonight. And extend that acknowledgement as well to the Yorta Yorta Nation and the Dja Dja Wurrung people, traditional owners of the lands occupied by other University of Melbourne campuses. We recognise the unique place held by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and their continuous care for and connections to the lands, skies and waterways, and their ongoing custodianship and care for over 60,000 years. We pay respect to elders past and present and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today, acknowledging the importance of Indigenous knowledges in the Academy and beyond. In making this acknowledgement of country, we commit to respectful and responsible conduct towards all others, according to the traditional laws of this land, particularly at times of formal ceremony. My name is Amy Christensen. I'm a lecturer in early childhood studies here at the University of Melbourne, and welcome to the Global Childhood Seminar Series. Before we get started tonight, I'd just like to remind everybody of a few things. If you're in the room, can you please turn off your mobile phones? If you're joining online, please know that while we can't hear you or see you, we can see your comments in the chat, so please post them in the Q&A. If you're having any problems, we have people manning that online, so please let us know by using the chat function. The toilets are outside and across the breakout space, if anyone would like them. And the format for this evening is 45 minutes of presentation and then about 15 minutes of Q&A. Now, for the people in the room, we have a roaming mic, and you will need to speak into the mic to ask your question so that it can be heard by the people on the webinar. For people who are on the webinar, obviously you can use the Q&A chat function. And that's about it. I would like to formally introduce Professor Alison Clark, who is Professor of Early Childhood Education at the University of South Eastern Norway. Alison's an academic and a visual artist, and since 1999, she's been interested in the theoretical, methodological and ethical aspects of young children's co-construction of knowledge using visual and participatory methods. Alison developed and has adapted the mosaic approach with Professor Peter Moss, a multi-method and polyvocal qualitative research approach for working with participants' perspectives, and it's contributed to a listening to young children discourse that has taken hold in the UK and internationally. Alison is currently engaged in research with practitioners about slow practices in early childhood education and care in Scotland, Norway, Iceland, and in Japan. Tonight, she's speaking with us about the work which has led to her new book, or now new old book, Slow Knowledge and the Unhurried Child, based on a 2-year study which was funded by the Frobel Trust. It's called Slow Knowledge and the Unhurried Child.
Indeed.
And it was named Professional Book of the Year, hello everyone, Professional Book of the Year in the Nursery World Awards in the UK. Alison has just joined us from the ECA conference in Brisbane, and I know some of you have already seen her speak there, so welcome tonight. Without further ado, I'll hand over to Alison. Thanks very much.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Amy, for that beautiful introduction. And I'm really delighted to be speaking to you today, for those of you who are in the room and for those of you online. I think I met Nicola at the ECERA conference in 2022 in Glasgow, and she said, come over and speak to us. So it's taken us 2 years. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. So, reasons to be slow, challenging the intensification and acceleration of childhood. Before we think about accelerated childhoods and a speeded up early childhood education and care, but I think we need to start by thinking about speeded up world. And I'm going to be drawing here on the work of Hartmut Rosa. So Hartmut Rosa says in his book Resonance, regardless of how successfully we work and busy ourselves this year, individually and collectively, next year we will have to be a little faster, more efficient, more innovative, better if we want to maintain our place and ours in the world. And the year after that, the bar will be set a little bit higher. In fact, success, strength and efficiency in the present are directly proportional to the strength of the compulsion to escalate in the future. I find that a very telling paragraph. I think especially that part about setting the bar a little bit higher. And I guess that's how it might feel. It feels for me, and I think for maybe others of you, how we are in these present times, and how success is measured by efficiency. We must run ever faster in order to maintain our place in the world. And recently, I visited the McClelland Gallery and Sculpture Park in Langwarren, and this is a maquette for Running Man. And I kind of thought, yeah, okay, this maybe fits into what I'm talking about. That head down, keep running. But I think this also connects with the work of Gert Biester, the educationalist and philosopher. And he talks about the impatient look. I'm inclined to argue that what we find here is predominantly an impatient look. Not only do we find a desire to put as much world as possible into the child or student, we also find a desire to do this as quickly and cheaply as possible, to constantly monitor and measure the effectiveness and efficiency of the operation. And then he goes on to say to make teachers' salaries dependent on the extent to which they succeed in producing pre-specified learning outcomes. The impatience of society, V&V the school, is therefore a sign of society's inability to give a place to the fundamental complexity and openness of all educational processes and practices. That is, to the fact that all education always and necessarily entails a risk. And I think, speaking in terms of early childhood education and care, I think we're well aware of the fundamental complexity and openness of the educational processes that we support and encourage. So, an impatient look. I'm going to be thinking about that in this talk, what it looks like and possibly what are the alternatives to it. And during my reading round of this subject, I came across this phrase which I hadn't heard before, so a proleptic organisation of time, which I think ties in with feelings around accelerated childhoods. So this is Jewett and Jones. Now they're working with older children who are facing exams. The examination itself, a year or so away, was constantly drawn to the attention of students through spoken reminders, through handouts, and through wall displays. In this sense, we speak of proleptic organisation of time. The tasks of the lessons were described to students as anticipations of the exam requirements. The final goal had a constant presence in the moment-to-moment activity of the lesson. So I understand this to be like when the future for children of different ages overshadows the present. And that to me ties into a whole kind of school readiness agenda, and where the kind of preparation for school totally becomes the focus. And so any joy in the present moment is kind of squeezed out because we're so concerned about getting children ready for the next step. So the final goal had a constant presence in the moment-to-moment activity of the lesson. But then I think we have a question of the accelerated higher education. And I'm a little bit nervous about raising this because this can make sometimes people sigh, shout, throw things at me, that we can even talk about it because it's so obvious. But this is a subject that has been written about very widely, and I think particularly in Australia. But I found a rather beautiful editorial by the geographer Doreen Massey. And in her editorial, written in 2002, she talks around time to think. to have the time and maybe the confidence to worry away at something, to read things, the work of others, not simply to find out what they say, but as moments in a longer, slower process of musing something over, to reread things, to go back to old material, maybe to rework it. Doesn't that sound radical? The issue of having time to think is more than one of whether we can preserve a free afternoon here and there. It is more about the overall pace and atmosphere of things. It is about what is valued. So what I'm talking about is deeply connected with what is valued in education and early childhood education. It is more about the overall pace and atmosphere of things. It is about what is valued. And so this is why I think the subject is so important, rethinking the relationship with time. What do we value? So I wanted to mention some new reading that I'm engaging with. This is Beluse Walker in her book Slow Philosophy, Reading Against the Institution. And there's a definite echo of Doreen Massey's work, nearly 20 years earlier, when she says, slow, it is chosen to counter a speed and haste that threatens the very culture of deep thought. And when I read this, I think actually that's what speed and haste does within early childhood education as well, because it can threaten the very culture of deep thought that happens when children have time to immerse themselves in play. So speed and haste are disruptors. Now, that's not to say that within a slow pedagogy there are moments of very fast interaction and dancing and speeding round and following children, that kind of line of flight that Deleuze and Guattari talk about. But I think there is something about a culture of speed and haste that can threaten this deep thinking. And that, I think, is the danger. So Beluse Walker quotes Cilliers, who says, the argument is against unreflective speed, speed at all costs, or more precisely, against speed as a virtue in itself, against the alignment of speed with notions like efficiency, success, quality, and importance. So again, it's not saying actually that, that speed in itself is wrong, but it's unreflective speeds. So it's when this relationship with time is not kind of spoken about and thought about and considered. And so, and again, against the alignment of speed with notions like efficiency, success, quality, and importance. So I have several examples that I've encountered when this speed is associated with efficiency. So I was working with, talking to educators, and I use that word for everybody working within early childhood education and care, different qualifications. This was in Shetland, so islands off the northeast coast of Scotland. And one of the educators there was telling me that she was working in a setting, a new member of staff, and she was told to be as quick as possible at changing nappies. So speed there was associated with efficiency, was seen as being of value. Which, and again, I was working with educators in Iceland, and a member of staff said the same thing to me, very similar situation. She was told that she was being lazy when she took too long to change a nappy. So, you know, in those scenarios, what is being missed? What is being missed is the relational aspect, and the building bonds and being able to share jokes and that kind of depth of belongings. So this kind of gives us a way into some of the concerns that led me to my 2-year study, Slow Knowledge and the Unhurried Child. and it was funded by the Froebel Trust. So Froebel Trust set up to bring into a contemporary context Frederick Froebel's principles around early childhood education and care. Childhood recognised as a time of children's lives in itself to be valued, emphasis on play, emphasis on the outdoors, very, very familiar principles to many of us. It took part, I started in January 2020, so quite an interesting, in inverted commas, time to be thinking about time. Yeah, so March 2020, I'd had one of my visits to Norway, and I left on the Friday, and on the Monday the university was closed and everything changed. But I think it was a period when time became very present, you know, in a way that I've never felt it before, I think. Obviously, our experiences will have been very different. For some people, it was speeded up time because of having to make very quick, very important decisions. But I think for other of us, it was a slowing down and a freezing and a kind of bringing time center stage, really. So in my work, I set out to carry out in-depth interviews with early childhood researchers, educators and advisors across 11 countries. It was a purposive sample, so I'm deliberately talking to people who I know are engaging with these ideas, rather than across these particular countries. Not to say that there are this is only part of an ongoing conversations, really. And then I held a virtual reading group because of the pandemic, and invited people on my Slow Knowledge blog to read the things that I was reading and to add comments and to make it part of a wider conversation. And then towards the end of the study, I held a focus group with educators and early childhood students to discuss the initial findings. And these were my two key questions. Are we asking young children and those who work with young children to run ever faster to maintain their place and ours in the world? So that's echoing the Hartmut Rosa quote that I mentioned earlier. And so basically to look at the hurry, to talk to people about what they felt, you know, where was the hurry in the sector, what did it look like, and then what were the alternatives? And so what alternatives are there to be reclaimed, rooted in early childhood traditions, pedagogies and practices? And I put quite a big emphasis on this question of reclaiming, because this is not new, but it's actually about saying let's look back to see at some of the well-established early childhood traditions and pedagogies and practices, and to celebrate the best of these, and to look at what is being lost in a very fast-paced, very measured neoliberal culture, and to stand up for these alternatives. So, the hurried child. And this was a phrase that, again, going back to the 1980s and David Elkin's work around the hurried child. So this is not a new discourse, but we're revisiting it in these times. So this was one of my participants. This is Emma Dyer, teacher and researcher. So she said, so I suppose there's this pressure in schools to perform and to be able to do certain things at certain times, hit certain milestones at certain points, but they're not necessarily developmental milestones, much more milestones in terms of what they can achieve or what they can demonstrate, so about performance. So children are supposed to be reading fluently by the age of 6 and writing, and because the curriculum is so heavily reading and writing led in England, it filters back and further back. So that idea of exploring slowly and doing all sorts of things, doing a range of different things, I'm not saying it's gone, but then that pressure starts earlier and earlier. So it's this phrase that really struck me. It filters back and back. So that's thinking again about the downward pressure on the youngest children. And then here's another quote. And And I deliberately use quite long quotes when I'm talking about the study, because I think to give status to what people were saying to me, and I think then to sort of take these comments seriously and look at them and discuss them depending on your own context. So Karina Gervin in the focus group said, so we're trying our best, and then you've got all this pressure. It may be from your local authority, it could be the Scottish government, it could be anybody. And the tiny small fish, you're trying to fight back the bigger fish to say, no, you know where these children, you know we're with these children. We've got the skills, we've got the knowledge, we've done the training. We know how to support these children. But ultimately, we're then almost forced to put them in boxes, and then when they get to school, it looks like those children aren't achieving when actually they are. And I think there's a real resonance there. I had the real privilege of going to Bush Kindy this morning. Fantastic. And I mean, but that kind of tuned in knowledge of the children was absolutely fantastic. And that kind of quiet listening and that kind of being comfortable with place. And I think it's so sad when that kind of deep knowledge about children gets the slate gets wiped clean. So, and this is a follow-on. This is Liz Turbot thinking about what it means just to be with children. So I think for me, especially working with babies, it's about just being, not moving on to the next thing. It's like just enjoying what they're doing, whether you're changing a nappy, whether that's having lunch, whatever it is they're doing, just enjoying that because, well, they're just developing. And there's a real pressure to get on to the next thing. But what is the next thing? There is no next thing. That's their day, and the longer they can spend, even a very young child, having their lunch in front of them, there's no hurry to get it into them. They need to explore it, but they need to eat with their hands if that be the case, but they need to just have time. So in my study, there were these 4 interconnecting themes which emerged. And the first one is being with, going off track, diving deep with children, and taking the longer view. And so I'm going to be saying more about being with, but a brief summary, a prioritising of being with children in the moment. So whether that's in bush kindy or whether that's sharing a story or changing a nappy. Being is about attentiveness. So one of my participants was Sylvia Kind, working as a tellerista in Canada and a great writer as well. And she said this question of being with, it's about being with children, being with colleagues, being with ideas, and being with materials. And then going off track is around a slow pedagogy, not being afraid for children to take learning in an unexpected direction. And then to have confident educators who are able to run with that and not get upset or bewildered by what's happening. And then following on from that, diving deep with children. So one that values exploration in depth. And for me, one of the elements of that is the ability for children to revisit their learning in a very engaged way, and then that being the platform for going forward. And then taking the longer view, which can see going beyond the short-term imperatives the whole time, a longer view enabling children to develop skills over time, but can be taking the longer view around sustainability and care to the planet and very many other areas. So thinking more about being with in the time I've got. So being with, this is a lovely sculpture. This is from the Norwegian University of Southeastern Norway, and the campus I'm on has a very strong emphasis on the arts and has collected some beautiful artwork over the years. And this is a mother and child. And in terms of thinking about the connection between being with, slow and care, I'm interested in this article by Sorels and Madrid Akpovo. And it's called Time for Slow Care, Bringing Slow Pedagogy into Conversation with the Ethics of Care in the Infant Toddler Classroom. And they say in this article, through slow care, we offer children care that is not judged by its economic efficiency, but instead by its depth of connection and responsiveness. So it's in complete contrast to the how many nappies can you change as quickly as possible, because that's the economic efficiency model. And it's also about reprioritising care as an emotional and a temporal practice. So I think it's interesting that they're bringing both together. So they're making the relationship with time explicit in this, rather than it just a sort of taken for granted element. And they identify these two different characteristics: care as emotional presence, a connection of being in the moment instead of being distracted from them. So putting that person in full vision of, I'm here with you and I'm going to do these things together, which I think is a rather nice summary. But also the care as acknowledgement, so recognising children's deep emotions and responding with care and warmth. So I think both these elements can be show us this connection between slow care and this idea of being with. But it also connects, I think, with the work of Mitchell, Moore, De Gottardi and Fleet, talking about an epistemology of care. This is rather, I love this article. And in it, they talk about the everyday and the importance of the being with in the everyday. And they say this means that when one re-encounters an everyday experience, such as mopping up the floor, folding the washing, or serving lunch, the resonance of past moments persists, and through potentiality of the present, care is born in the moment. Moments offer us a way to re-examine the overlooked aspects of care. So somehow in the slowing down, we're putting things that maybe get a bit forgotten, moving them to giving them more attention. And I love that, the resonance of past moments, because I think this is another aspect of thinking about the relationship with time. It's how, as educators, we can hold this knowledge of children from maybe the day before or maybe the 6 months before. And then we can bring that into the present. And that's very skillful. And I just had to include this photograph. So I went to a setting in Brisbane, and this was a sign for mopping the floor that children had made. So it says, caution, wet floor, complete with a mop. A very cleverly made, designed mop that they were actually going around using. I thought it was rather wonderful. But in the article, Mitchell, Moore and colleagues talk about folding the bibs. I've just got one example from the article here. Christopher was taking his time, pondering his decision. It was not that he didn't know which feeding bib he wanted, but more that Christopher seemed to enjoy the process of choice. His finger firmly indicated the bib with the lion print, and Beth, the educator, within the moment, warmly confirmed with him, oh, you'd like the lions, okay. But you can see in that Christopher is being allowed that moment, that kind of pause, which I think can be a rare thing for young children sometimes to experience. And this I think it's something to reflect on. Okay, is he enjoying this process of choice? And being able to slow it down in this way, I think there's a deep respect there. Caroline Gard, in a recently completed PhD, she talks about adagio interactions. And it's kind of nice, I think, using a kind of musical term here, which I understand means slowly or at ease. So I like that kind of at ease. Okay, so one of the educators Caroline interviewed said she'd been involved in a form of using a video-based methodology, which Caroline calls video interaction dialogue model. And the educator that had been involved in this project said, it's the little bits that you have enabled me to see. It has been so good to remind myself that those little things matter, and the little things I bring do matter. There is a lot of value in those, and I think I have probably overlooked them myself. They can be really short, fleeting things in a very, very long day. but they build up to a much bigger thing for those children who are here for a long time. So I think the importance of the difficult to measure here. So the things that we're building up in very long days over time, which I think can include things like connection to country. You know, we're building that up over time, and you may be not there to see the impact that that's having. So, slow pedagogies, need to speed up, Alison. Slow pedagogies can involve the following features. So, being with, attentive to the rhythm of the children and the adults and the materials, can have these rapid, intense moments when ideas really take off, as well as a slowing down of pace, makes time for listening and collaboration, celebrates the group as well as the individual. And I've just been able to look up at the Antarctica exhibition, which is, and in that piece of the children's reflections, there are some lovely group pieces where they've come together and pooling their ideas about Antarctica. Values play and the present moment, taking the long view, cultivating over time, values the difficult to measure, and then seeks to enable deep discovery and strengthen relationships. And so here are some brief examples of the work that has carried on from my first study. So this is the Taking Time Back study based in Falkirk, which is an area of Scotland. And this is working with centres that follow Froebel's principles, so Froebelian practice. And two of the settings decided that they wanted to look at meal times and how they were, the opportunities that children had during meal times, how they could look at it through thinking about time, through a temporal lens. Could it be different? What would that look like? And then a third setting was looking at their relationship with nature, with country, and seeing how they could spend longer outdoors. What would that enable in terms of just enjoying the walk there? Educators being more relaxed about being able to spend longer outdoors. And then in Iceland at the moment, I'm working with 4 early childhood centres, or preschools or play schools, as we probably should translate the Icelandic. And this is working with the University of Iceland and the University of Akureyri. And they had some time in this study to think about, okay, what logo would they use? So I think this is quite an interesting project. What would you choose for a slow project? Lots of debate, of course, about this. And they chose the word stilla, which in Icelandic, I understand, means calm. But I think there's quite a lot of work to think about in a local context about what vocabulary really works, because it's calm and slow. It's kind of led to some quite interesting kind of discussions with educators around what that means. Are we just calming the children down, which is not really what I'm kind of talking about. It's about attentiveness, which can be different from that. We can be very engaged, very lively, very full on in the moment. So yeah, vocabulary is very important to talk about. I'm working with Japanese translators at the moment about a translation of the book. And I only mention that because it's a pedagogical process to think about, okay, what does this mean? What are these words in this context? So in the Icelandic study, they've chosen they talk about the study in this way: to create an environment for both children and educators to appreciate the rhythms of daily routines, and to shed light on strategies for stress reduction, enhanced social sustainability, and overall well-being of children and educators. So they're looking at it definitely as a well-being project, both children and educators. Attention to local context, very important. I just kind of quite like the thought of showing this image in this context in Australia, because it's probably not how your children look most of the time. So, you know, the full body suit, the kind of wellies, they're kind of absolutely encased. This is actually from Sweden, but would be the case in Norway and in Iceland too. But of course, then I think attention to local context might be the many hours spent applying sunscreen hats, clothes, layers. So yeah, local context. But in Iceland, they chose to look at the cloakroom because this was a period in the day when they felt most rushed and stressed. So initially, the cloakroom was chosen as a key area for introducing slow pedagogy, working with children aged 2 to 3. It is currently a stressful spot where children are often under much pressure. The aim was to transform the cloakroom, making it a place to foster deeper interactions. So thinking about it not just as a, well, this is the bit we have to get done in order to do that. It was like, actually, how can this become a more enjoyable, a kind of recognised as an important part of the day, spending together. So, and then another example, very briefly, this is slow pedagogy, going deeper with children's learning. This is in Orkney, where I live, a set of islands off the northeast coast of Scotland. And the educators here are thinking about a slow pedagogy journey. So a kind of thinking together, reflecting on, okay, how can we free up more time, thinking about permission to be with children more? That's led them to think about the timetable, where they can grow more time, to talk about what that means in terms of leadership and permission from leaders. Then they've been looking at the natural transitions through the day and thinking about how to make the most effective use of the staff time. So kind of people have said to me, does this cost more? Well, no, it's actually been more about thinking about how the existing resources in terms of staff time are being used. So an impatient look, can we move this to more of a patient look? And I think patience can be a resilient, persistent, active, brave quality. You know, it's not a kind of sissy thing. It's kind of like, this is tough stuff. There is room for this type of powerful patience in a timeful approach. So what would a slow and patient early childhood education and care look like? And this is my summary. Makes time and places and materials for children to explore what they think. Creates opportunities to deepen and extended children's learning, and I won't go through all of these, but makes time to listen to multiple perspectives, values the here and now, pay close attention to the present, whilst recognising children's past knowledge and experiences and mindful of the future. And it's been about, there is an element that's about resistance in that. So this is Nathan Archer's work with Joe Alban Clark, and they talk around micro-resistance. Moments of micro-resistance, often local, quiet, and invisible, but multiple. So the kind of quiet things that happen below the radar that actually can enable more time to be with children. So when I was in Isara in Brighton, I was walking back to the station and saw this. And I thought, okay, that might be my logo. So it's a very feisty snail with kind of spikes on him. But before I'm thrown off this platform, slow and patient university, okay? Brief thoughts. I think it's about being able to read and return is one element. So this is Bulas Walker again. My interest in a reading that comfortably returns time and time again to the same terrain, the same book, the same passage, to ponder its significance with all the benefit of unhurried time, the passage of time and the silence and space this time affords. And then I think there are different strategies that could be used to help to make that possible, whilst I'm very aware that the wider structures within which we sit make this very, very difficult. So this is one idea from Erickson, Bergenis, and Amos. They hold reading circles, which they describe as putting together ideas around slow pedagogy and reading circles as learning methods to stimulate transformative learning practices that foreground 21st century skills, with an emphasis on opening ourselves to different knowledges. So they've been using this in their teaching around anti-racism. But I'm going to give the final word to Kerry Fassett, attending to time. So here are some of her questions. brilliant piece, Possibility in the Temporal Imagination. Okay, so temporal imagination, thinking about how time could be different. She says, time is neither natural nor neutral. Our timescapes and narratives are constituted by both social and physical phenomena and have in turn political and economic effects that structure values and beliefs in often invisible ways. And then she comes up with some questions. Who is telling the time in this situation and how? What more than human time practices and rhythms are at stake? What might my practice of time telling look like from other perspectives, say from parents or members of the community or colleagues? How do my rhythms look from the standpoint of other actors? What are the histories and habits that shape my own temporal assumptions? Where do these come from and what sustains them? And then she says, what other ways of telling the time might I learn? And I think one of the many ways of telling the time that we might learn are from young children themselves. So what other ways of telling the time might I learn? And this is, so it's not the final word to Kerry, I'm sure she wouldn't mind. This is from Jackie Cousin's work and one of the 4-year-olds she talked to. And he said, well, I never play with the construction kit here. I never, it takes long to make all the little houses and they've got these really little nails. I really like it. But when I build a house, it takes me a long time and then I've got to break it up and it's tidy up time. So a salutary note to end on. And to end with my own acknowledgement to the wonderful people I've been working with in many countries and the discussions I've had. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Alison. We're just going to stop sharing the screen and we do have about 15 to 20 minutes for questions. So if people would like to ask questions, that's fine. I do have a mic and you have to use the mic because otherwise the people on the webinar cannot hear you. So with that, would anyone like to go first?
Hello. Yes. Hello. Hello. Alison, we have two questions. One is a light question. I'll start with that one first. It's sort of that's a wonderful mop. And what was it made from? Perhaps not an academic question, but Matt is impressed.
Okay, yeah, no, I was very impressed. So this is a wonderful centre with that was actually made with corrugated cardboard and wool, and the setting has a wonderful sewing studio. So I'm very interested in how sewing can be used as a slow practice. That's happening in Falkirk in Scotland. And it's become a really lovely moment, a lovely way of engaging carers and parents as well, and also members of staff who actually secretly are great with a sewing machine or whatever, and it's kind of enabled them to share their skills. So yes, that's one of many great things that's happening in that mother duck setting.
Sounds wonderful.
So that was the easy question, right? Okay, go on.
The easy one. So the next one's a little bit long, so I'll take my time in asking. Professor Alison, thank you. This has been wonderful. The inclusion of 11 different countries is interesting in your study. Could you please share if any First Nation and or non-Western school of thought voices were included in this study? That's the first part to the question. And then could you also share with us if this selection range was a conscious choice, and did you find any stark differences during your reading group meetings? The theme of deep listening and connection are timely reminders to learn more about going back to the basics and being acutely aware of our own agendas. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'm very
It was a question by Artie.
Thank you very much for the question. So, as part of my study, I talk around about the idea of slow knowledge, and that phrase came to me from a conservation biologist, David Orr, who contrasts slow knowledge slow knowledge with fast knowledge. And in his piece, he acknowledges indigenous knowledges and also says slow knowledge can be very old. And is his whole kind of way of talking about it is respecting that those over many millennia building up of knowledge. So in my book, I was aware that it was a gap in the group in my initial study, but felt very keenly, especially by the end of the writing, that this was such an important element to be able to build into these discussions. So when I went to the ECA conference, there was a question and answer slot in the programme. So I made sure that we had that as a panel with Rachel from an Aboriginal background, who we debated and discussed, because I wanted to make sure that I was recognising my limited knowledge, and also opening this question up around slow knowledges to all these traditions. And yeah. So I came up with this phrase during the study. I wanted to see this kind of building up of a dictionary of possibilities for educators and for academics. And I think that can build on so many different traditions. And I think in Australia and New Zealand, that is going to have a very different flavour, and there are going to be many different vocabulary in there. And I think it will be same in Norway, to be able to include some Sami knowledge in that as well. So yeah, this is a beginning of drawing this work together, this subject together in this way, but open for many other discussions.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
I'm wondering, when you think about time, I like to think about time rather than slowness as a neurodivergent person.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if you've thought much in your work about Cryp Time or Cryp theory, and how we might start to, I know when we're talking about visibility, what that actually means in when we're thinking about global childhoods, what that looks like if we keep using a neurotypical version of time and slowness rather than a more open understanding of what Cryp theory asks us to think about.
Yeah.
And so I'm just interested in what that looks like in your work.
Yeah, so I haven't in my own work drawn on Cryp theory, but I've been reading a theologian called John Swinton, and he talks around becoming friends of time and timefulness. And I think in his work, he was working with people with a whole range of what he would describe as, I think he would describe as disabilities in his own language he was using, but he was saying that actually there are other ways of thinking of time other than clock time and linear time, and we need to be much wiser at how we think about time. So I think that's how I'm approaching this, and I think to be and in terms of working with children and working with teams of colleagues as well, I think to be more aware of our different personalities and skills, and how that means that what are we comfortable with in terms of pace and rhythm is important. So I think it's another dimension.
Thanks, Professor Alison. Just you spoke about resistance.
Yeah.
We're working hard in Victoria. We've got 180 bush kinders now, which is fantastic. However, there are many educators across the country that feel so much pressure for transition learning and development statements, individual portfolios, end of year concerts, graduations, meetings. Do you all agree? Yes. Not of course, the City of Melbourne City of Melbourne or the Gowrie, of course, but as a consultant trying to mentor other educators around the country, they're very pressured. What advice have you got for them to resist?
Yeah. Okay. So I say find your allies, which might be sitting in this room for a start, for example. So find the people who are feeling like you. I talk about finding the slow moment, so I guess that's an individual thing. But I guess in the day, whatever your day is like, you know, are the more slow moments that you can find. They found a lovely quote from a publication about the Reggio approach, written as they described it, and in that they were talking around leaning towards slowness, a sort of an intention to lean more towards slowness. And I guess I like that because I think it's kind of practical. It's like saying, actually, this may be within the frames in which we're working very, very difficult, but actually, because we want to be more with children, or that actually this is what we're going to try and do as a staff team or as a group of consultants, or, you know, at whatever level. So yes, and I think that piece by Nathan Archer and Joe Alban Clark around micro-resistance is quite an interesting read. Yeah. I think it's different within higher education. So just to say, within higher education, you know, I think we all have a responsibility depending on our role. So I find, if I'm thinking about in terms of a course, okay, what is there any flexibility here to help students go deeper in their reading, for example? You know, what can I do with the responsibilities that I have? Is there a way to do that? Or if I'm talking with PhD students, also to sort of to help them acknowledge what a privilege that length of time to engage with one subject is. So rather than always being scared about the next thing, to actually think, actually, this is a gift of time, yeah, and then how can I make most use of that, rather than be anxious the whole time, which I'm quite good at.
Well, is this on? Yes. In relation to that and to what you were saying about the pressure of
I
time.
don't think it's on.
Can you hear me? Yep.
Okay.
I was just thinking about when you started the conversation tonight about acceleration and resisting that, and this idea that we can't just change policy, you know, by sort of, I guess, even giving examples. We have to change the idea of what is possible, and I think that's why we gather the documentation that we have, the learning documentation, to make that learning visible, and the pedagogical possibilities. And I just that notion of changing policy is very complex, because we know that the people who have that powers over us, so to speak, to make us feel always constantly under pressure and accelerated, everything's accelerated, that we need to change the idea of what is possible and show them. And I rather say that than evidence-based. I just wondered if you had anything to add to that, if that's possible.
Well, I do agree with you, Nicola, and I think the sort of documentation, the sort of learning documentation that we gather is a very important part of this conversation, this discourse, really. Partly because I think I'm interested in seeing how children can go deeper into their learning and connecting with all those ideas of making learning visible, going back to Project Zero, and that takes time. So I'm interested in looking at that through the temporal lens, so saying, okay, what opportunities do children have to look back at their learning? How could that be taken on through school more? Because I'm so aware, as a researcher, I've been in an unusual position in going back to children, say 2-3 years later, and showing them the work they did with me, and then realise, oh my goodness, this doesn't happen normally within the school system, certainly within the school system I'm aware of in the UK. So I think that, you know, that element of making the learning visible is and children revisiting is an important dimension to this slow pedagogy. Yeah. Hi.
Hi, Alison. I'm a teacher.
Okay.
So I think that one of the things that I really like about what you've said is that you're looking at the work that educators are doing. You're seeing the resistance that they're involved with, and just to follow up on what Louise just said before, I think that there is a lot of pressure that comes on an educator who wants to slow down. It takes a very brave person, because being slow can easily be perceived as being lazy. I think that it's often the colleagues and the families and the children who are keen for a bit more slow, but the pressure remains from the outside world. And I think that when the academic world is in a position to say this is good for children, that gives us a lot of strength. And we know that those sort of things are within our frameworks, so they're there. But I think that we do need that that continued sort of push from universities, from academics, to make us feel when we're not doing it by ourselves.
No,
we've got that support.
Yeah. Thank you. And so I think this question of permission, of kind of being given permission, is an important part of this. And I think that applies to us within higher education lecturing, but also working with young children. And yeah.
Professor Alison, I didn't know that Doug Farger was there. Doug Farger actually started the first bush kinder in Australia. I know that Aboriginal people have been, educating children on the land for 60,000 plus years, but Doug needs to be acknowledged because he pushed that back in 2010, and now
there we go. That's
180 bush kinders in Victoria.
Yeah, so that's how transformation happens. You get on and do it. Yeah.
Hi. Oh, I don't know. No, that's okay. I was about to...
No, Doug is there.
Is this on?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So thank you very much for this. And what I'm wondering about, it kind of follows on to points people have touched on, in terms of the educators you worked with and them feeling pressured and hurried, did you find over time that their ability to articulate their craft, so to speak, changed? And if it did, what changes did you see as beneficial for them to be able to, I guess, fight for their corner?
Yeah. So if I take the Falkirk example, so that's working with settings who have a strong value base, if you see what I mean. And I think part of the confidence has come from sort of being able to match up their values with, say, the match between Froebelian principles and slow practices really fits. So I guess that helped the educators have confidence to say to parents, well, actually, yeah, we are going to we're going to sort of have longer outdoors and we are going to enjoy the walk there. But this enables the children to notice things. It enables us to listen more carefully to what the children are saying. It allows unexpected things to happen, and we think that's good because, so that kind of demonstration. So one of the Falkirk settings, they organised a morning and invited the parents who were able to come and join them on the walk. And that was their way of saying, we're confident about what we're doing, we can talk about it, and it also a way of taking new members of staff along because, it's one thing to work with your very dedicated, keen first into an idea group, but then it's how do you bring new members of staff along? And so I think it's around that kind of building confidence and being able to, as you say, to explain, well, we're doing it like this because we think we've noticed this. We've noticed maybe the shyer children being able to express themselves more. Learning, the project went in a new direction that we never thought of. So it's kind of examples like that.
Thanks, Alison. We've got a couple more online here.
Are they more like the mop, or are they?
Maybe. So, as I was listening just from myself, you reminded me of a wonderful book by Jenny Odell, Saving Time, I think it was called, a couple of years ago. And in that, she talks about Kairos and Chronos time.
Yep.
And the question that we have here from Diana is, curious, did you use the concept of Kairos time in your research? And if so, can you expand?
Yes. Okay, so I didn't specifically, but the idea of Kairos time being different from the kind of clock time, so more in tune with the seasons and cyclical time. And I think that's one example of what Jenny Odell talks about chronodiversity, which fits into the question around Cryp time. So, time is such a complex question. I mean, why am I standing here talking about it? I mean, it's scary because so many people have written about time. But I'm talking about it because I think it makes a difference to working with children. And, so therefore it's really important to sort of, bring it into the equation more. So, yes, I think Kairos time is a helpful way into thinking different ways of thinking about time. Jenny Odell's book, I sometimes do talk about it because in that second book, Saving Time, she's written 2 books, and I think Saving Time was written during the pandemic, American cultural writer. And she talks around, well, maybe we could come up with some different words for thinking about time. And she came up with the idea of talking about to garden time, which I really like. Okay, so to garden time, it needs nurturing. It needs us thinking about it. A gardening time can be very difficult. As those of us who are gardeners, it can be tricky stuff, and it needs commitment. But yes, that idea to using different ways of talking about time. So to garden time, I think, is an interesting phrase.
Thank you so much, Alison. All right, everybody, I would like you to please join me in thanking Alison. Thank you very much to everyone who has attended in person and to everyone who attended online. The recording will be available on our website for everybody, so you don't need to have a login, you don't need to have registered to be able to watch it. It will be publicly available. If you can, just take a moment to scan this and give us some feedback so that we can improve for our next seminar, and keep you posted on what's coming next. Thanks very much.
Thank you.